Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us at ABC7 NY. We are streaming live wherever you are on whatever social platforms, and I thank you for watching. I'm Bill Ritter of Eyewitness News, and we are counting down to Election Day, November 16th. It's shaping up to be a very busy 2 weeks ahead. Of course, much of the attention has been on national politics and the crucial midterm elections 2 weeks from today, but there are a couple key races here in New York we want to highlight as well. The race for governor, the incumbent Andrew Cuomo seeking a third term, and U.S. Senate, the incumbent Kirsten Gillibrand, the Democrat, seeking a second full term. Both in focus this week because the leading candidates are squaring off in their one and only debates. We're going to begin with the New York gubernatorial election. The debate just airing moments ago between incumbent Governor Cuomo and Republican challenger Marc Molinaro, the Dutchess County executive. And what a debate it was. It was nasty. It was at times a slugfest, as described by our political reporter Dave Evans. Here's a sampling.
Governor, you have led the most corrupted state government in America. 8 individuals closely associated with your administration are now going to jail or have gone to jail for federal corruption charges. At what point, after 8 years of being in office, do you take responsibility?
Your county legislature is calling for an investigation on you for kickbacks and perjury, where you give a contract to a vendor and then a family member got a job and they got another contract. That's your own county legislature asking for a criminal investigation of you. So I wouldn't point fingers.
I find that entirely ridiculous.
And to be honest, after watching that debate, that was one of the calmer moments. There was interruptions. It was just a fest, a slugfest, as political reporter Dave Evans described it. Joining us tonight, with 2 weeks left to discuss this and the other big stories of the week, in our studio, political analyst Hank Sheinkopf, and from our Washington, D.C. ABC News Bureau, Deputy Political Director for ABC News, MaryAlice Parks, and I appreciate both of you joining us. Hank, I'm going to start with you, since you're a local and looking at the Cuomo race. You've known Andrew Cuomo for many, many years.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Well, you're not going to make a judgment about this, but what did you think of the debate, so what you saw of it anyway, and the nastiness of it?
It's very nasty. Look, Molinaro had to find a way into it, and Andrew Cuomo had to find a way to ensure Molinaro didn't get into it, and that's exactly what they did. Molinaro got into it by getting under the governor's skin, particularly when it came to talking about corruption and things that the governor does not like to talk about.
There was much interruption, and I was a little surprised by it. The moderator didn't seem to be able to control either one.
Look, I've prepared candidates all over the country for debates, and the thing you have to do when you're the underdog is to cause disruption, and that's what Molinaro tried to do, and he obviously was successful because we're talking about him.
Governor Cuomo has avoided debates.
Sure.
He's up, the latest Quinnipiac poll shows him ahead by 23 points. His opponents usually get between 30 and 35 percent of the vote in his elections. That's what history has shown. It happened with Cynthia Nixon in the primary. He didn't want to debate, and he was finally, with 2 weeks to go, he was sort of forced into this.
Why would you want to debate if you're up by those kinds of numbers? And if you're, at least a little bit careful, anything can happen. It's not likely he could lose. It might be likely that he could go down some numbers. He's really a potential presidential candidate no matter what he says. And he's got to do very well and make that very clear. A
perfect segue to bring in MaryAlice Parks, the Deputy Director of ABC News, the Political Director of ABC News. And I don't know if you heard the debate or not, MaryAlice, but the local part of it aside, Hank brought up an interesting point about running for office. In his primary debate with Cynthia Nixon, he said, "I am not going to run for president." But how important was this debate? How important is this election for Andrew Cuomo?
Well, he's been taking it from all sides. Obviously, people weren't expecting him to have such a tight primary race, but arguably it made him stronger and perhaps more attractive to a larger Democratic Party across the country. I remember listening to Cynthia Nixon say that she essentially felt like she won the race, even though she very much lost the primary, because she successfully moved Cuomo so far to the left. I can imagine that would be his angle and his play if he were to take on sort of that challenge, if he were to step up and raise his hand. But there's going to be even other New Yorkers potentially in a 2020 Democratic primary. It is going to be a really crowded field, and he would have a hard time potentially distinguishing himself with a really mixed record.
So the point is, then, the bottom line is, what does he have to do to make that kind of impression across the country come November 6th in terms of this election for governor of New York?
He would probably have to prove that he can get things done with Democrats in the state. Right now, Democrats are looking for resistors. They're looking for state executors who are willing to take it to this president, who are willing to sue this administration. We have seen Democratic state parties push their Democratic governors to be real forces against this administration. We haven't seen that so far in a big way from Andrew Cuomo, and I think he would have to prove that he's willing to do that if he wanted to run nationally for the Democratic primary.
Okay.
Well, Governor Cuomo has made his opposition to Trump policies a major part of everything he's said, and he's used it in this general election against Molinaro. He's talked about Trump since the beginning of the year. It's been pretty pronounced. And frankly, if you go back in Cuomo's record, he can say he's taken on presidents. I mean, he's taken on powerful interests. He's the guy that sued the NRA and to get them out as a way to get guns out of housing developments run by HUD. So here's a guy who's very much a maverick, and his bones will be made nationally by the numbers he gets here, but also by the fact that he will position himself as a job creator and a job developer, and as someone with the courage to take on the powerful. He's been screaming about Trump for a long time.
And perhaps MaryAlice and Hank, like no other potential candidate for president, even though he said he wasn't going to run, the governor is in a position to say, hey, this is what I've done. As if on cue, as if you read what we had in mind for this countdown show, we have another bite from tonight's debate with Andrew Cuomo and Mark Molinaro, in which the governor talks about Trump.
For you to sit here, an acolyte of Donald Trump, mini-me of Donald Trump, who is decimating health care in this state, taking health care from poor people, cutting Medicaid, cutting mental health services, removing health insurance from close to 1 million New Yorkers, and say the answer is more health care service.
But, sir, I've been in elected office for a very long time. I was in office before you. I was in office before Mr. Trump.
You're a lifetime politician, we know.
Your private law firm represented Mr. Trump and his real estate interests before state agencies while your father was governor. You accepted $60,000 from Donald Trump and haven't returned it. You, when you were trying to make friends with the president when he first came to office, told him you wouldn't run against him. And you, sir, had him at your bachelor party. I didn't. So at the end of the day, sir, I have a long record of committing to help those who are most vulnerable. I grew up on food stamps.
Are you saying you don't support Donald Trump?
I'm saying that I'm absolutely committed to the delivery of mental health service.
Do you support Donald Trump?
Let's get out of this conversation.
Do you support Donald Trump?
I support anyone who is going to effectively make an investment.
Do you support Donald Trump?
Mr.
Do you support Donald Trump?
Mr. Molinaro,
you can't answer it.
One can only imagine, both Hank and MaryAlice, what a debate between Donald Trump and Andrew Cuomo might be like. Now, I want to talk to Hank about this, but first, MaryAlice, when you saw that just now, when you heard it, what did it tell you about, one, Governor Cuomo's ability to really attack Trump and attack anyone who supports him, and two, some of the allegations that were made against him?
Well, that's what Democrats are struggling with on a national level, having to both run against this White House, sort of choosing to run against this White House, but also having to deliver on the issues. And we saw that sort of that tension play out in that clip, and obviously play out in New York State politics and with Cuomo's career. He would have to both prove that he can stand up to this president and has a good track record on health care in the state, on gun control in the state, on wages in the state, and we have to tell the country what a government like his would be like. And I think that's a tension that we're seeing Democrats across the country really struggle with.
It seemed to me, though, MaryAlice, that when we heard that soundbite from Governor Cuomo, that was really a presidential soundbite, or at least a presidential campaign soundbite, not so much a gubernatorial soundbite.
Potentially, but again, we're going to have probably 20 Democrats flirt with the idea of entering this presidential race, potentially even Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. It's hard to see how the two of them would be willing to run against each other. It's going to be a very crowded field, and everyone is going to have to find a way to distinguish themselves from one another.
Having worked for a president and having worked in a presidential reelection campaign, I can tell you that governors tend to do better as presidential candidates.
They've been chief executive.
Absolutely, because they got summed up. Andrew Cuomo's already set the table for himself, as have a couple of others, frankly. He's taken on the NRA. He's talked about guns. He's done stuff when it comes to medical services in the state, housing, infrastructure construction and improvement and on and on and on. So MaryAlice is right. He is putting together the perfect argument, as he sees it, to be a presidential contender. Against Gillibrand, it won't be a contest.
Will he be accused of bullying, as in that we just heard in that bite?
Yeah, you know what? He will. Okay, so we'll have to
And I will say, though, that in 2016, that notion that governors make better candidates was sort of thrown to the wind.
By Donald Trump.
By Donald Trump. We had almost half a dozen Republican governors that were basically stepped all over.
What I said was that governors make better candidates, make better candidates generally for president. If we look at the history of presidential election, there have been a lot of governors and very few senators in comparison.
Yeah, that's true. George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, Jimmy Carter, and Ronald Reagan. Let me go. You guys, you mentioned, MaryAlice, you mentioned the Gillibrand race. My honor is going to be to moderate the debate Thursday, 1:30, streaming live, Eyewitness News Studios, on Thursday, and airing it, of course, on Sunday on our Up Close shows at 11 a.m. This will be Kirsten Gillibrand and Shell Farley, the Republican challenger who runs a financial services firm, and she's works in the money industry. She is taking on Gillibrand. The polls show a pretty wide spread, at least 25 points, according to the latest Quinnipiac poll. But they are going to be in their first and only debate. Both of them, Gillibrand walked out or decided to cancel her debate last weekend because there was a strike at one of the cable companies, an electrical union strike, and she didn't want to walk over the picket line. So we have now stepped in, and we're going to do the debate on Thursday. Any national implications before I get Hank with the local implications here, MaryAlice?
Yeah, I think there are 2020 implications there as well. I take the point that gubernatorial, that governors and former governors, former gubernatorial candidates tend to make good presidential candidates, but that doesn't mean we don't have a lot of senators that are currently toying with the idea, and Kirsten Gillibrand is definitely on that list. This last year and the way that she has behaved in this re-election has really confirmed that idea that she's considering a 2020 run, because she's not spending much money. In her past re-election campaigns, she has still bought a lot of ads, still spent a lot of money. In this case, it seems like she's hoarding the dough a little bit, perhaps wondering whether she's going to spend it down the road instead.
She has millions of dollars in the bank right now, in fact.
But she has spent money. Yeah. She has spent money in helping other candidates around the country to put stakes in the ground, which is really true. I think she'd be interesting. But again, what's the great argument? When they rip her apart on television, because she's going to have to stay to the left in order to get this done, to talk about, well, she said, you know, she was an NRA supporter. She was opposed to immigration reform. Suddenly she's moved in the other direction. It's going to be hard to get past that.
It wasn't so suddenly. It has happened over a period of time. And she did it, she says, when she
realized how bad it was. When she was raising money from the NRA, it wasn't so bad. But when she stopped taking the money from the NRA, it was really terrible.
On the other hand, I'll play devil's advocate. She will say that, yes, I changed my opinion about this stuff after seeing victims of gun violence and running for U.S. Senate and taking Hillary Clinton's seat when she was appointed Secretary of State. She says, and she has said this on the record, she saw the victims of gun violence and changed her opinion about it. And it was different, the realities of gun violence in big cities versus upstate where she was.
What were the victims of gun violence doing before? Disappearing? I mean, this is not a new phenomena. And I would suggest that will wind up in negative ads against her, and there'll be an independent expenditure. And who knows who knows who will be behind it? Could be the very people on the left that she loves so much these days.
She has also been, MaryAlice, very active and vocal as part of the hashtag #MeToo movement, and she was very vocal. You'll remember she was one of the leaders, in fact, maybe the leader, of getting Al Franken booted out of the Senate to resign for the good of the party. This as she attacked the Republicans who were accused of sexual abuse and sexual harassment and sexual assault. And you know, you look at what Al Franken did before he was elected, those pictures, very different than some of the things we're talking about since then, of women being raped and sexually assaulted.
Right, she has really positioned herself ahead on that issue. You're exactly right. She has had a zero tolerance policy when she's talking to other Democrats or any Senate colleagues of hers. She's led the charge on trying to get reform in the Senate on Capitol Hill for how victims of potential sexual assault and sexual harassment are able to report their assault internally, staffers. And she's done a lot of that work on the military front as well, helping to really lead an effort to change reporting within the military. I don't know if that will be enough. You're right, she has a sort of a complicated past as a moderate that could be tricky for her in a Democratic primary. But on that issue in particular, she has been really out front.
And she would say she didn't get anything past Hank because the Republicans blocked her, especially on the sexual harassment bill that she has pending.
Okay, good enough. I mean, that's a reasonable excuse for most things. The record's rather sparse.
Yep.
In terms of accomplishment. She's been in the Senate for, what, 11 years?
Since 2010, which no, I'm sorry, 2009. Yeah,
It's a little bit sparse. But you know what? Anything can happen, and it depends. There was a guy whose great achievement before being elected president was being, I think, in the Senate for 2 years, and before that he was a state senator from a state in which a Democrat couldn't lose that particular state Senate seat. His name is Barack Obama, and he rose to great things. Who knows what Kristen Gillibrand has in store for her?
The stage is set for people without experience to run for office. I think we passed that Rubicon. Let me ask you both about the caravan, because immigration is a very big issue, and it seems to have boiled down to this caravan of Honduran refugees crossing into Mexico with hopes of getting in the United States, seeking asylum. It is an international crisis, as Matt Gutman from ABC News has been reporting. It's just it's a real hellhole where they are. No sanitary facilities. I don't know how they're eating. Drinking water's tough. It's just very, very difficult for all these people to march across Mexico in the heat. There have been some who have died. It's a crisis. And yet, for many people, MaryAlice, and for some Republicans, including the president, this has become not necessarily a crisis for a humanitarian crisis for those people. It is a rallying cry to rally the base of Donald Trump's supporters.
The president has been very open, honest, and transparent about the political value that he sees in this caravan. You're exactly right. He's not really talking about it as a humanitarian issue, but is being very upfront that he thinks it's a winning issue for Republicans. It makes sense that Republicans, if they felt behind in the polls, would want to deflect, but I think he's getting a lot of pushback for not proposing new ideas, but instead using pretty racially charged language to talk about this issue. Joe Biden was out on the campaign trail today, called it hysterical, a sign of hysteria. We've had other Democrats that have called him out for what they say is nothing more than fear-mongering.
There is, I think, by any objective reporting mechanism, any journalistic standards of reporting facts and the truth, no evidence to back up the president's claims that there are bad players who are mixed in with these people and are coming here to incite all sorts of terrible things, Hank. And yet, the president's base is eating this up. If you look at the crowds at his Make America Great campaign rallies, which he's doing twice a week, they are eating this up.
And I would venture to say that not only are they eating it up, but they're getting more charged from it, as are suburban women who are seeing children stepped on and trodden upon, and blood and assaults and who knows what else are going on. People trying to get water and coming from a place where corruption, human trafficking, gang violence, and general poverty are the rule. That's Honduras.
And what do you think this is going to mean? MaryAlice, I'll get to you, ask you this question in a second, but Hank, what do you think is going to mean for the midterm elections? This has strengthened the Republican base.
And it's also going to turn out Democrats.
Both.
Both.
What do you think, MaryAlice?
I agree with that. This is no longer a primary. This is a general election. And some of these very extreme positions that this White House is used to taking have an opposite effect as well. There's a yin and a yang there, where Democrats can feel motivated to come out as the president continues to use really radical language.
Well, let's move on to some of the numbers, because I want both of you to hear my interview. If you can, if you have time, MaryAlice, stick around. If not, we'll say goodbye. But I want you to hear my interview that's about to begin with the executive director of the Board of Elections. But I want to first say, underway early voting in 30 states and the District of Columbia. Nationwide, it's up 26%, the number of votes from 2014. Georgia up 31%, where, of course, there's a major race you could talk about, MaryAlice. Virginia up 38%. Minnesota up 67%. What does this early voting tell you?
Well, generally, the conventional wisdom is that early voting helps Democrats because generally the conventional wisdom is that the more people vote, the better the Democrats do, especially because Democratic turnout is traditionally low in midterm years. In the past few cycles, we've seen Republicans come out in much fuller force in those off-presidential years. But mostly, the only thing it really tells us is that across the board, people are paying attention, they are interested, and they are going to the polls with huge monster numbers.
Hank, we don't really know whether it's Republican or Democrats voting. We don't know that.
Well, we don't know, but here's what we do know. In Harris County, which includes the city of Houston, Houston itself may be the size of the state of Rhode Island. It is the most diverse city in America with the greatest with the greatest number of different groups altogether, and it's growing. And guess what? They had record numbers of people turning out for early voting, and that's a county that Hillary Clinton won by big numbers.
There you go.
So if that's an indication, then the general rule, the accepted wisdom that MaryAlice cites of early voting favoring Democrats is likely to be true.
MaryAlice, if you want to stick around, I know you're really busy. If you want to stick around, listen to this quick interview, and I'll get your opinion of what Mike Ryan, in charge of the Board of Elections in the city of New York, has to say. Hank, you too. We'll take about 5 minutes, and then I want to get your opinions. If not, thank you for joining us. Let me move now to Michael Ryan. He's in our newsroom. He's the executive director of the Board of Elections in the city of New York. And Mr. Ryan, I appreciate you joining us tonight, because I know that in 2 weeks from tonight, you're going to be very busy.
Well, thank you for having us. It's important to get the word out to all the voters about what they need to know.
And what do they need to know? What's the word you want to put out?
For the first time in 4 out of the 5 counties, every county but Staten Island, we're going to be using a 2-paged center perforated ballot. So the voters need to be aware of that. They're going to be given the ballot. We have a new catchphrase. It's it's vote, tear it, scan it. Mark it, tear it, scan it. And you have to insert each one of those pages individually into the scanner. It's going to be a little bit different for the voters in every borough but Staten Island.
This looks like I have a copy of the ballot here, Michael, and it's a great catchphrase you have. It looks like it's something from my Torah. By bar mitzvah. It is just a non-stop series of paper. It must be 3 feet here high when you unfold it. And then you're asking them, I'm going to ask my producer, Patrick, you want me to tear it now? Okay, watch this. So you're asking people, when you're done with this, to then tear it, and then I guess scan it. But this has not been done before. Are you worried at all that this is going to be a little hard for many people?
Well, certainly we're going to ask the voters to be patient. We have plans in place for the extra volume that will be in the ballot bin liners that are inside the scanners, but it really isn't any more complicated than what they already do. It's just an extra step. And so everyone should enjoy their voting day and come out to the polls, remain calm, tear the ballot. It tears relatively easily.
It does do that, yep.
And they have to put both pages in. You'll get the same message. Thank you for voting. And then you have to put the second page in, and it will say thank you for voting. And then you could be on your way.
And it's double-sided, right?
It is double-sided. There are not candidates on in all sections in all boroughs, but there are certainly the propositions are on the second side of the ballots in all boroughs.
And you did something kind of unusual. You're producing 110% of the ballots for registered voters, meaning you've printed an excess because some people may make mistakes. You're anticipating that.
Well, that's true, and there's a second reason for it. We have a ballot on demand system that we can utilize on Election Day to supplement where there might be any shortfalls. With the perforated ballot, we don't have the ability to replicate that ballot on Election Day. So we really went over and above to make sure that no one is disenfranchised due to a lack of paper ballots.
Well, you mentioned disenfranchised. There is a lot of controversy, and I'm not going to ask you to comment on some other venue, but you know, in many states there's huge amounts of controversy about people being disenfranchised and not being able to vote. You guys, I know, are trying to go the opposite way and get anyone who's able to vote to vote. What if someone has a problem? What if they can't produce an ID? What if they can't, they forget where they're voting? What do you do with those things? How do you make it easy for them to be able to vote?
Well, first and foremost, New York is a non-ID state.
I know that. I led you into that.
Right. So if you happen not to be, if you did not provide to us the last 4 digits of your social or your non-driver or driver identification number from the DMV, that would be the only circumstances where you have to show identification at the polls, and that would be a one-time event. We encourage everyone to go to our poll site locator in advance of Election Day.
There's a website for that, right?
Yes, and they can go and they can get walking or driving directions to their poll site, as well as view a sample ballot in a PDF form. And for the visually impaired, we have it also in machine-readable format. So the information is all there. There's no reason why folks can't be well prepared on Election Day.
What's that website, Michael, if you could say it for us?
It's NYC pollsitelocator.com.
NYC
pollsitelocator.com.
We'll have that on our website, NYC.
And you could also go to our regular website, and there's a link to it there as well.
Okay. Why do you think there's going to be more? Because the numbers sort of don't lie, right? My father used to say, you know, figures, liars figure, but figures don't lie. The figures of how many people voted in the primary gave you a clue, from what I understand, of how many people might vote in the general.
Well, certainly. Going back to 2006, which was the previous high watermark in the last 12 years, about 400,000 folks voted in that September primary. Over 940,000, 941,000 people voted in this past September primary, as compared to slightly over 1 million voters in the general election for governor 4 years ago. So there's quite a bit of interest in this contest.
And as you said, almost about 3 times the amount that voted in the primary the 4 years before. Do you have any way of telling who's voting Democratic, who's voting Republican?
Not before Election Day, and I want to be clear, New York is also not an early voting state, but we are seeing an uptick in interest in voting by absentee ballot for those folks that might not be around on Election Day.
Right, so that's a good indicator, too. Are you saying more people are requesting absentee ballots than usual?
Yes, and we don't give out the statistics ahead of time, because if it turns out that you can actually vote on Election Day, we encourage people to still vote at the scanner on Election Day, even if they voted by absentee, because under those circumstances, we would simply discard the absentee ballot.
Right, and of course there's problems with the absentee ballot, a potential problem, because you have to mail it in, so it puts a third party in charge of that.
Correct. So we always tell people, if you can get to the polls, that's the best way to do it, and if not, we'll certainly process the absentee ballots.
Okay. Michael, anything else you want to mention, safeguards that we haven't brought up? And I do so appreciate your time.
Well, 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. 2 weeks from today, we give a lot of opportunity for folks to get out there. People have sacrificed greatly for us to be able to do that in all different ways, and we certainly would encourage everyone to participate.
And let me also give a shout out to all those people, men and women, young and old, who volunteer to staff the election polling places. They're just fantastic, and we really do appreciate it.
Well, I was remiss for not doing it, but thank you for remembering.
Okay, well, I appreciate it, because I know the people who are staffing the place where I'm going to go will say, I saw this on Channel 7. Michael Ryan, Executive Director of the Board of Elections in the City of New York. Michael, I so appreciate you joining us tonight. Good luck.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. MaryAlice, are you still there?
Yeah, hi.
Okay, and Hank is here. What did you think of that? You know, from being in Washington to little old people in New York here.
You know, regardless of party, it should be heartening to people to hear that there are government officials that are working hard to make sure that there is access to voting and that voting is made as easy as possible. I think all of us can agree that that is a big part of civic responsibility, and it's worrisome to see how many states don't necessarily feel like their residents are empowered these days. There's been so much concern, especially in the South and even out west. We've been talking about stories in North Dakota, some of these states where residents, in fact, have felt very much the opposite. They've felt excluded from the voting process lately.
And, of course, you know, no ID, no problem in New York. No ID, you might not get in to vote some other places.
Absolutely. There's such a wide and pretty complicated range of laws across the states. I think that that's something that's lost on a lot of people, that you really have to do your homework and figure out what the requirements are in your own state. New York doesn't have early voting. A lot of states do. There are already today early voting taking place in 30 states across the country, a really wide range of what's acceptable and where you can vote depending on where you live.
Hats off to Mr. Ryan, and hats off to the whoever runs the elections in the city of San Francisco or Los Angeles or any place in California where the ballots are twice the size or 3 times the size.
All those propositions in
That's
California.
correct. Very, very complicated business. We thought it'd be easier with the Help America Vote Act. It's gotten more complicated with the machines that are being utilized, the scanners and the rest, and how Mr. Ryan and people like him in those jobs are going to figure this out, who are well-intended, is beyond any of us to understand.
You consulted candidates who worked in the civil rights movements, Hank, and you know what MaryAlice was talking about.
Absolutely.
You know, it's
well,
a
the national disgrace is what is going on in Georgia right now, where people are being disincluded. And that's not, you know, we think it's a Southern problem. But look, in New York and other places, although we've cleaned up a lot of the act, it was not uncommon for people to be denied access to voting booths.
I used a derogatory word there when I said what's happening in other places, because people are being denied their right to vote, it looks like. Yeah. And most of the people who are being denied in some of these states are people of color.
No question about it. Again, the Georgia thing is a disgrace. We as Americans, as a group, ought to be looking at that, ought to be picking up the phone, it doesn't cost any money, and banging the phones at the Georgia, whatever it is, the Secretary of State's office, the guy that's running against Ms. Abrams, and saying, look, you can't stop people from voting.
What a great discussion. Hank Sheinkopf here in New York, and in Washington, our Deputy Political Director of ABC News, MaryAlice Parks. Both of you, I thank you so much for your insight and your flexibility about timing and everything else. This has been really great. We would love to have you on next week if you're able to do that for Countdown. MaryAlice, check your calendar, and Hank, you too. And I hope to see both of you at some point during our extended countdown on November 6th. This is really interesting, and it gives us a time to sort of stretch our brains a little bit and stretch our conversations rather than just looking for sound bites. So MaryAlice, I appreciate you being here tonight, and Hank, you too.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. And thank you for joining us for this countdown show. 2 weeks to go. We have 2 more editions of it. Be sure to watch next Tuesday and on election night at 8 o'clock. ABC 7 NY, streaming live on Facebook and YouTube and Twitter, and of course around the clock as well on Eyewitness News Channel 7, including tonight on Eyewitness News at 11. And you will be able to see more highlights from the debate with Governor Cuomo and Mark Marinaro for running for governor. And don't forget, Thursday, 1:30 p.m. on all our social media and websites and website platforms. And then Sunday, 11 a.m. on Up Close, you can see the debate between Kirsten Gillibrand and Shell Farley in the race for U.S. Senate. Again, thank you for watching. I'm Bill Ritter, and for all of us here at Channel 7, have a good night.